Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Tim Binnall.
No commercials, no subscriptions, no network, no rules. And at the end of the day, my friends, no comparison. Really looking forward to tonight's program. We're bringing back an old friend of the show. Actually, kind of a new friend in a way. I just got acquainted with Paul Bartholomew about 3 years ago. And I told the story, but we'll tell it again in a little bit. Up in upstate New York when I was hanging around there, running around there in the summer of 2021. And he was on BOA subsequently thereafter in December of 2021. He is from Whitehall, New York. He is, I like to think of him as the Wizard of Whitehall when it comes to the Bigfoot phenomenon. He has really been a driving force in putting Whitehall, New York on the map as the Bigfoot. I'll go so far as to say the Bigfoot capital of the East Coast at this point. It's not just New York. I mean, Whitehall is synonymous with Bigfoot at this point. And enormously, thanks in large part to Paul's work. He's a Whitehall native. He's studied the Bigfoot sightings around Whitehall extensively over the years, but he's also a student of the paranormal in general. We were just talking before we went on the air. He's got a Facebook page. That's where you can find him. So just punch in Paul Bartholomew, Bartholomew, into your Facebook search. You should be able to find him. He'll be mutual friends with me and probably a whole bunch of other people that you know of in the paranormal community. And he's a student of all the paranormal and pop culture, too. And he has an awesome Facebook page where he has like daily updates on all these different historical moments and news that's happening around the world of the paranormal and the high strangeness. So just an exceptional student of the esoteric. And he's been looking into all this stuff for 4 decades plus. So a seasoned researcher. And as I said, a new friend of the show after meeting him back in the summer of 2021. So with all that said, welcome back to the show, Paul.
Well, thanks. It's a great pleasure. Always a pleasure talking with you, chatting here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I knew I wanted to get you back. Because when people hear this is actually like mid-August, we're taping this, but when people hear this, we're going to be dropping this one on September 18th, which means the awesome Whitehall Sasquatch Festival is coming up in 10 days from when people are hearing this. You can't quite fake the excitement of it being 10 days away. I know that, Paul, but when people hear this, it will be 10 days away, and I am kind of ginning up my own excitement here just thinking about that because it is an amazing event. Barbara Spoor, who oversees the whole thing, she owes me like a dinner or something. I don't know. I've been promoting this event on the show. I've been promoting this Whitehall event on the show for like the last 6 to 8 months. Like every time we have a guest on who's even in the area or a Bigfoot person from New England, I'm like, you got to go to Whitehall. You've got to go to this Whitehall Festival. It is absolutely amazing. It's held in Whitehall, New York, as I said. It's coming up in 10 days. And do we know who the speakers are yet at the event?
Yeah. So far, we've got it set up. Barbara and Emily Fleur have the schedule out. Tentatively, it is myself, Steve Culls, Squatch Detective Bruce Hallenbeck, who is an expert on the Kinderhook phenomena down there, the Kinderhook creature, and he's come out with a book recently on the Kinderhook phenomena. Mike On, who does the tactical research, and Brian Goslin. So it should be a pretty good lineup, and they'll have other events as well. You know, there's jumpy houses for kids, and there's games, and there's vendors and food, and they will have the Calling Festival at about 5:00, where everyone gathers and they give their best Sasquatch call. And it's a blast. And I mean, you've been there. You were a judge at one of them. I mean,
absolutely, yeah.
An absolute blast. And it's a it's a plus, a positive in a field where there can be lots of, bruised egos and things. This is a good way for everybody to get together and have a good time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you hit the nail on the head. It is. How many people would you say were there last year at the 2023? Because it gets bigger every year. Like the first year I went in 21, I was like, this thing is big. This is really big. And then by the time, like last year, it was like, this is giant now, man. This is getting bigger every year. This is crazy.
It is. What happened is years ago, there was a fella named Dave Molinar. And he's since has passed away, but he was reading about a mosquito calling contest that this small town somewhere had gathered, and people would gather around. They'd have a festival, and then they would do their best mosquito calls. And he said, mosquito calls, he says, they're getting so many people. He said, why can't we do a Bigfoot call? And I thought, that's a wonderful idea. And Dave would get in a gorilla suit, a Bigfoot suit, and he would stand around town with a sign, and he would promote the festival and so forth. And so that's how it started. And it would be literally just a couple hundred people. And but it'd be a fun time. And sometimes there might only be 20 people doing a call, something like that. And then it got bigger and bigger. And Barbara took it over, Barbara Spohr.
Yep.
And she just has elevated this to a whole different plateau.
It's amazing.
And, it is. It is. So we've gone from a couple hundred people. I've been fortunate. I've spoken at each festival when we started. I think it was back 2015, 16, something like that. But Barbara has taken this to a new level. And so we go from a couple hundred people to, I think, perhaps last year, probably about 5,000. And of course, in the tiny town of Whitehall, formerly called Skeensboro, my hometown, this sort of shuts down the town. But it is a blast. And the businesses, it's good for businesses. It's good for people to get together. There's some people that I only see, this time of year. I look forward to seeing them because they come up for the festival. So it's gotten into a very a large gathering, and it's a big event. And Barbara literally spends 364 days.
Yeah. It's I follow her on Facebook as well, and it's a full-time thing. And I can't even, I mean, people who follow me on Facebook, social media, I'm sure they've seen the pictures. It's hard to almost even capture how big this event is, folks. Like, I'm talking, first of all, now you'll be able to tell me, it's along a river. What's the river?
Right. This is the locks. This is, this goes into Lake Champlain.
Okay.
So this is lock, I think it's lock 12. And, so this is the canal that runs through Whitehall.
Okay.
And so overlooking the festival is the Skeen Manor. And when you come into Whitehall, you can't miss this huge, Gothic mansion that sits on the side of the hill and overlooks the town. It's just gorgeous. They light it up at night, and the Skeen Society and so forth has kept it going. And it's a remarkable building. So that overlooks the whole town and overlooks this festival. And it sort of looks like Salem's Lot, the poster for Salem's Lot when you're in Whitehall, because it's overlooking the town. And so it's interesting that when years ago, when the Bigfoot phenomena had first sort of been embraced in the Whitehall area, it was a negative. Police officers that had a sighting back in the 70s, it was an extremely negative experience for them. Everything was confidential. I had a police officer, Dan Gordon, from an 82 sighting, swore me to secrecy for over 20 years, 22 years, before he came forward himself. So we take that very seriously. If somebody has a sighting, we'll keep you confidential. We won't use, it's all on your terms. We're just looking for the information. And Dan actually went and passed a polygraph. He was also with another officer at the time. This was in 1982 in February. They saw basically a creature cross the road in front of their cruiser. He pulls over, he takes out his gun, he tries to pursue, creature's long gone. And so he's had a forensic sketch done and so forth. He's passed on since that sighting. But he was able to work with us for years. And a lot of that was done confidentially. So this was a negative experience back then. And the town was sort of, it was sort of split on what was really going on here. And then we just kept researching it. And then it slowly moved into being a positive. We had documentary crews come in. Doug Hajek came in with his Mysterious Encounters show. And then that morphed into, the Monster Quest program. They had an episode on Whitehall, actually two, because Gigano, their first show, was actually mentioned Whitehall as well.
Nice.
And then, America's Book of Secrets, Finding Bigfoot. We can give Bobo a big thank you, because in that episode he called Whitehall the northeast capital of Bigfoot. Yeah. So that was thank you, James Fay, for that, because that was a huge promotion for us. And they did a nice episode on the Whitehall case and interviewed people and showed Whitehall in a very good light. And so over the years that just kept going. And Seth Breedlove with the small town monsters, and it just went on and on. So we've had this entire experience in Whitehall go from a negative to a positive. And I was back in the old days when it was negative, and I caught some flack myself for researching this type of stuff. But now it's nice to know that this has come full circle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what I was trying to encapsulate earlier was like, folks, you got to imagine like 2 to 3 football field length festival along the lock. So, but it looks like a river. Let's be honest. I thought it was a river. It's along the water. So far, knock on wood, we've had like the most gorgeous, picturesque weather for late September in upstate New York. It is just amazing. Yeah, it's just absolutely amazing weather. So knock on wood again. But it is really, and the reason I was saying to Paul before we started the show, the reason we're dropping this here on the 18th, if you're within driving distance, you've heard me rave about this event, go and check it out. You are not going to be disappointed. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of vendors. Again, like a football field length wrapped around with down the middle vendors with all kinds of amazing, cool stuff. And not just folks with things to sell, like podcasts, video shows and stuff like that. People get vendor tables there, and they're there to tell you about their projects and stuff. So it's really a cool like networking experience. I found a few different guests through Binnall of America that you'll hear down the line at the Whitehall Festival. Then you move down, and then you're like at the speakers. There's a pavilion. Then you get into this long line of food trucks. And if you're like me, folks, a food truck, you can't beat a good food truck. Like, we're talking some real unique and interesting foods all along. Then you get down further, you just keep going. Then you're at a beer garden with a live band playing classic rock tunes, and you can get your beers and you can chill out there and hear the music. So it's like, I mean, short of, we joked about this with the Wisconsin UFO event back in June. Maybe you can talk to Barbara about this for 2025. Short of adding a pro wrestling element, like a wrestling show at the end of the night, this is almost the perfect Binnall conference. So, and I went in 2021, and it's become a staple of my year now. It's like, well, yeah, at the end of September, I'm going to be up in Whitehall, so I can't do anything else. In fact, there are other events and shit that I'm like, oh, you schedule it on Whitehall weekend. I'm going to be in Whitehall, man.
Well, it's funny you say that, because the Whitehall Athletic Club used to hold the pro wrestling events on Friday nights or Saturday nights. And they haven't done it in quite a while. They did a couple of MMA events as well, but the pro wrestling shows always drew quite a crowd. And it was literally, where if I wanted to go to one of the events, literally, if it's at 7:00, I could leave at 5 minutes to 7.
Oh, nice.
So
that's a good deal.
Like tailor made for me, any of this stuff.
So that's my hard pitch, folks. We're going to get into chatting about other stuff now, but this is, I really wanted to put this event over as much as I possibly could. You got 10 days. So if you're in Western Mass, around New York, New Hampshire, Maine, you can make this. You can drive this. This is a day trip. You can get there, have a good time, turn around, and be home by the end of the night, and you will not be disappointed. It is, I think it's like the preeminent event here in my area for certain, for New England. It's a happening. So
Yeah, what Barbara's done with it is phenomenal, and
Absolutely, Barbara Spoor is amazing.
Absolutely.
So let's get into some wild stuff now, beyond what we just talked about. So you recently posted about an upstate New York UFO incident. It's the 50th anniversary. Now I'm really going to confuse people tomorrow, but so if they're listening now, a month ago, it was August 20th, 1974. In upstate New York, a pretty well-known UFO incident that was not on my radar, pun intended, until I saw your video piece on it this week. So talk about this August 20th, 1974 case.
Right. This became one of the great cases that was caught on radar. Now, when Dr. Hynek put out his book, The UFO Experience, the great landmark book that categorized UFO encounters, first of kind was a sighting, second kind physical trace, third kind, beings being involved, then a nocturnal light, nighttime light or a daylight disc. And then he would have the RV cases, which were radar visual. And so this was one of the great radar visual cases. And it happened, obviously, you just mentioned August 20th of 1974, 50 years ago. It kills me because I remember this as if it was like last week. And I can remember the excitement and the media covering this. And this was the talk of the entire region. And basically what happened is you had UFO sightings that night. And you have a little radio station in Glens Falls, New York. Mm-hmm. And it's WWSC. And they start broadcasting live updates on the UFO phenomena. And right from WWSC, you can look out and see West Mountain, which is a ski area. And they were watching UFOs over the West Mountain area. And a small crowd started to gather. And then the crowd got bigger and bigger, so much so that they brought the police up and they moved them down to East Field because they were in the road and stuff.
Oh, wow.
The crowd down there. So they're all watching you. It looked like a scene from Close Encounters.
Right.
And so all this excitement's going on. They're watching these strange lights dancing across the sky. And then we find out that there was quite a bit of police involvement. There were New York State troopers that were sighting these objects as well. One was watching an object over Lake Saratoga, and he said a large object appeared and was moving slowly, and then two smaller objects appeared out of nowhere and darted towards the object. And then he says, as if you reached up and turned off a light, and that was close to a direct quote, the whole thing disappeared. Wow. And meanwhile, Albany Airport, in a very strange situation, they had some long-range radar that they were testing. So it was a perfect opportunity for them to test this target and to this particular target that was coming in very fast. I believe the speed was 3,000 to 5,000 miles an hour. And so they were testing it to see if it could be some sort of temperature inversion. Mm-hmm. And they said it was nothing. It seemed like a very solid object. There was nothing to explain it. And so at that time, there was a researcher for the National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP, and his name was Ernest John. And Ernest John started investigating the case. He talked to the people in the tower at Albany. He talked about the radar that they were tracking. He talked to the police officers and so forth. And it was documented in a book called Celestial Passengers, UFOs and Space Travel, which he wrote with Margaret Sachs. And Margaret Sachs wrote a encyclopedia on UFOs as well, the UFO Encyclopedia, which also carried the incident. Now, John Spencer, who wrote that famous book on the Bermuda Triangle called Limbo of the Lost, he also wrote a book called No Earthly Explanation on UFOs, and he wrote a book called the UFO Yearbook. Well, in the UFO Yearbook, he carried this report as well, this 1974 report. And it was regarded as one of the top 5 incidents of the year.
Wow.
And so it was a big incident because of all this verification from the radar. And there was extensive interviews with the radar personnel. Of course, you get into that thing where they don't like to go public. This is a negative. And of course, back then, this was a huge negative for pilots, for any professional people, police and so forth. So they really didn't like their name attached to it, but they were fascinated with the topic. And, amongst themselves and off the record, I've dealt with many law enforcement officials over the years. They are very interested in this topic. They will tell you stories that, that are remarkable, but they don't want their names connected to it because they don't want to be known as the UFO cop or the Bigfoot cop or whatever. So we faced that for years, but that anonymity, like we did with Dan Gordon with his Bigfoot sighting, we didn't talk about it for 22 years. That's how we treat the UFO cases as well. So we have all this very credible reporting of objects that seem to be solid radar tracks, and they were dancing across the skies in the Northeast. And there was one in particular that was also seen by a pilot as it was heading towards Albany, and that was actually tracked and verified by radar.
Wow.
So this all took place 50 years ago. And, it was just a very exciting time. And to this date, that incident has never been adequately explained.
That's wild, too, because like I said, it's funny. You see so many cases get overdone. If I have to see another Bentwaters thing or Roswell, for God's sakes, it's funny because this is the kind of story that's crying out for some kind of exploration. Your unsolved mysteries or something. That's a really remarkable case. Multi-witness, radar. That's got a lot of great elements to it.
It does. And one of the speakers that's going to be at the conference that we're having in Whitehall is Bruce Hallenbeck, who wrote a recent book on the Kinderhook phenomena. It was his birthday, August 20th. And in 1974, he vividly remembers watching these unknown objects from his home in Kinderhook. So he had a personal experience. And you mentioned Bentwaters. There's a fairly famous witness, Larry Warren, controversial witness, who had a similar experience, UFO experience up here before any of the Bentwaters actually happened. So he had a personal experience as well. And of course, I've known Larry for years, known Bruce for years. And so they both had, personal experiences on this August 20th, 1974 incident.
That's wild. I have to take a moment and compliment you, Paul. You have like an encyclopedic knowledge of these different books and things. As you were kind of rattling them off just now, I was sitting here in awe. I'm like, how does he remember all this shit?
Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
I was amazed. That was awesome. That was very impressive, dude.
Thank you.
I was looking at your bio and over at the Coast to Coast site, and it mentioned that you studied under anthropologist Professor Warren L. Cook, and together you guys investigated many sightings of large, unknown hairy bipedal creatures sighted throughout the Northeast. I had never heard of Warren Cook. He sounds like he was kind of a mentor to you. On this show, we like to celebrate the past, pay it backward, I guess you could say, and really appreciate those people. So we've never talked about this. So who was this professor that you worked with? And I take it you guys were looking at Bigfoot cases.
Yeah, Professor Warren Cook is sort of a legendary figure in the Northeast here. And he was a professor of history and anthropology at Castleton State College when I went there. And of course, that later became Castleton University. Now it's Vermont University. But he was the professor of history and anthropology, and he was an expert on ancient Vermont, which is the pre-Columbian contacts that like Barry Fell and those researchers were doing years ago. And so he had objects that, rocks that had Ogham writing on them that were found in Vermont and things. And there's still a display at the Castleton College University Library. If you go to the second floor, the entire second floor is pretty much dedicated to Dr. Cook and his ancient Vermont research. But he grew up in Washington State, and he had an intense interest in the Bigfoot phenomena. And of course, being an anthropologist, he called it this cosmic species that we can learn so much from. So here I am going to college. And of course, my sister had gone to Castleton, one of my sisters, Kay. And so I went to Castleton as well. And so I had already known Dr. Cook, informally. And so I'm going to his anthropology class, and it's basically Bigfoot 101. And then I'm going to his archaeology class, and it's basically ancient Vermont. So this is just tailor made for me. It's why I went to Castleton, and it was a wonderful experience in my life. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Cook ended up writing the foreword for our first book, which was Monsters of the North Woods. And we had set up back then, computers were in their infancy for, the personal computers and so forth. And so we had actually set up a computerized database of Bigfoot sightings for the New England area. And that included, it focused on New York and Vermont, but it also included other states like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maine and Massachusetts and so forth. Yeah. So we had this database of sightings we had worked on for years. So we ended up talking with scores of witnesses as well. And then in 1985, Dr. Cook went to China, and he exchanged information between his American Sasquatch research and the Chinese Che-Ren or wildman research over there. And so there were so many things that he would bring back, journals, and I had connection to some of the Chinese scientists in their Wildman Society and so forth. Yeah. But it was an excruciating time to research because I'm old school, so I've done entire manuscripts on carbon paper. No one can appreciate the pain there, and so. At that time, I would get information back from China that was written in Chinese. Right. And so then I would have to take it with a tape recorder, and we would go to a Chinese professor, or even we did some at a Chinese restaurant. We would translate that information. And it was a long, excruciating process, but, I wouldn't give it up for anything. And we were able to translate. Now you just hit a button.
Yeah,
you scan
I'm
it.
blown away right now.
Yeah, it's instant. So
God bless you, man. This is like you kids have it easy. I complain on the show. I'm like the old man nowadays, but listen to what Paul had to do to get this information and appreciate the work that he put in to do it. I'm amazed. This is really something else, man. Hats off to you.
So we had established the Chinese research. And when Dr. Cook went to China, he brought back information and contacts. And so he was an American in 1985 in China talking about the wild man there. So that was kind of a really neat thing. And so he held a conference before he went to China, and it was overflow crowds. And then when he got back from China, he held a second conference. And these are on the university campuses. And that drew another overflow crowd. So he had tapped into the interest in this cryptozoological enigma. And, for a college professor, that was somewhat controversial. You pretty much had Grover Krantz, and then later on, Jeff Meldrum, and Dr. Cook. They were all, accredited college professors who were able to study this phenomena. And I remember Dr. Cook was asked one time, because Grover Krantz said he was pigeonholed as far as money and so forth because of his interest in this phenomena. So he took some criticism for it. And I remember Dr. Cook, they asked him one time, they said, are you worried about, your credibility with this topic? He says, no, I've got tenure. And that was that was the lesson. The lesson was get tenure, do your studies, get your professorship, get your tenure, and then go into these topics. Yeah. And then you aren't untouchable, but you have more access. Where if you did this before you got accredited, you may have run into all sorts of roadblocks. There was always a stigma attached with this phenomena. So Dr. Cook sort of broke down a lot of barriers involving the stigma attached with studying this phenomena. And he studied it right up to his last days.
Oh, wow. That's, again, amazing. I was completely unaware of his role in all this. So, that's amazing. In fact, in 2004, which was about 15 years or so, 14, 15 years after he had passed away,
because Dr. Cook had tried to get this put on an endangered species list in Vermont, and actually contacted Madeline Kunin, who was the governor at the time, and he got it proposed. Now, that wasn't accepted, but it was a step in that direction, and they were all very encouraging of it on the committee, but they didn't pass it. So in 2004, I said, this is the time to try it. We just had a documentary crew. There's more information. Things are starting to go positive. So I wrote up a legislation, and it was sort of a cross between the Lake Champlain Protective Ordinance in Port Henry and the famous Spokane, Washington Bigfoot Ordinance from the 70s and 60s, 70s. And I said, well, if we write something sort of in between there, maybe we can get something passed for the Whitehall area. And we did. So Whitehall became and the town and the village both passed it. They became the protective habitat for Sasquatch. So that was a step in the right direction. And then, of course, we had gotten into a positive situation where we had multiple documentary crews coming in and very positive stories, no debunking pieces or exposés trying to expose hoaxes or things, but just presenting the information as it was. And then we looked into the history. And you have the Algonquins and the Iroquois and the Abenaki, and they have legends of stone giants and giant men of the mountains and Wendigos and so forth. And Samuel Champlain talked about the Gugu, Native American creature that Native Americans that told him about. And so we have all this information, this historical data, sort of this dark history that was not really presented. So you have Whitehall as one of the birthplaces of the U.S. Navy. Yes. And now it was the protective habitat of the Sasquatch. So it took a while, but that dark hidden history emerged as well.
And what's really amazing, I sent you an article last week that I wrote for Coast to Coast, and it's like, since Whitehall passed this thing in 2004, it started spreading around the country. And I sent you one. Now it escapes me. The state it was in. So Pennsylvania. It's a town in Pennsylvania. They are now they've adopted Bigfoot as their official cryptid. I don't have the name of it in front of me, but anyway, they're in the article I point out there's like 5 or 6 different communities now that have adopted Bigfoot as their official cryptid, or they call themselves the Bigfoot capital of Tennessee or whatever. That's right. Yeah, there needs to be some kind of like coalition of these communities. You should try to do that. See if you can put together some kind of like sisterhood of Sasquatch towns.
Well, my brother back in about I think it was around 2005, he wrote an article on ecotourism in cryptozoology, and it was focused on what Whitehall could do to move this along. And I think he touched on a chord there. This is a form of ecotourism, and it helps the communities. It's a positive, and we're not butting heads here. We're not bringing 2 opposing groups in to get into a debunking fest or whatever. This is all a very positive thing that's developed, and I think from the 1970s to now, this whole aura has emerged in a positive light. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's because we're just more knowledgeable of it, or if it's just a natural evolution of the phenomena itself. But, years ago, if you saw a UFO, you were ridiculed. Years ago, if you saw Bigfoot, you were ridiculed. And now there doesn't seem to be quite that disdain anymore, and credible people can come forward, even though we have to still keep a lot of people on anonymous status because that's how they want to handle it. You would be shocked to learn of the officials that have had a Bigfoot sighting or a Bigfoot encounter, or will relate an encounter that they feel was legitimate, including Incon people, rangers, state troopers, police officers, and a lot of them still will not go on the record. And I understand that, but just knowing that they're out there is a huge plus.
Yeah. Interesting. So yeah, you got me thinking. Yeah. So yeah, you hear a lot of stuff that you can't even like say because they're like, look, don't tell anybody this, but I saw this. Yeah, interesting.
All the time. And you know, they point you in the right direction, and you just have to make sure, like with Dan Gordon, and there's another officer that was with him that evening. I've never used his name publicly.
Yeah.
Because he wants to stay anonymous. But Dan Gordon was with another person on that February. It was about 4:30 in the morning. It was early February of 1982. And he's riding around in the police cruiser with another police officer. And they would go out by South Bay, which is if you're heading actually towards Ticonderoga, they would turn around and then come back. And that was part of their routine patrol. And so they encountered a typical road cross sighting. As a creature crossed in front, they pulled over, you know, Dan got out with his gun and so forth. But that was a very, you know, they both brought me to the spot, you know, shortly after the encounter and stuff. But we had to be very careful. They were identified as law enforcement officials for the longest time. And that meant they could be a corrections officer, they could be a sheriff, they could be a trooper, they could be a white, you know. So we protected them as much as possible. Then Dan finally, because of health issues, he said, you know, I just want to, and he went forward with an interview with Doug Hijack on Mysterious Encounters, where he didn't use his name, but he used his face. And that got him sort of in the door. And then the next time they interviewed him, he said, yep, you can use my name. And then it was out. And I think it was a tremendous relief for him after all these years. And but it was actually his being in ill health that moved him along to getting that story out. But, you know, taking the polygraph was huge as well, because I remember the polygrapher said, you know, and that was a state polygrapher who would come up, who would do, you know, murder, kidnap cases, things like that. And he said, yeah, no signs of deception. So for the skeptic, that's a difficult case. They can say, well, something ran across the road and, you know, they weren't sure what it was and they think it was Bigfoot. You know, that's about all they can say, because both of them verified that it was a man-like bipedal creature.
Right.
Both of them verified that it took 3 steps to cross the road. Now, my brother is about 6'1". And when we were shooting when the History Channel was up shooting one of their segments, I think it was Gigano, they picked a smaller road that was adjacent to where this sighting took place on 22A or on 22. And they said that, you know, so the road's a little narrower. It still took my brother, being 6'1", 6 steps to get across that road.
Oh, wow.
Elongated steps. Now, whatever this creature was, it crossed in 3. So now we're in a situation where, how do you explain, okay, if I'm a skeptic, first of all, at 4:30 in the morning, I'm not going to be crossing the road in front of a car. That's just absurd. Right. But if that was the situation, how am I crossing that road in 3 steps? Seems impossible. And so that's a very tough case for the skeptic to explain away. They passed the polygraph test, which means that he believes the story is real. In other words, it wasn't a concocted tale, which we knew from the beginning anyways. So this just further verifies that there is a real phenomena going on out there, and it's elusive, but it's real and it's tangible, and it's a life-changing event. Now, I've talked with a lot of people who've had experiences, and you get these sightings that I call confirmation moments. And that was a confirmation moment for Dan, because he did not want to see this thing. He did not want to be known as the Bigfoot cop. This was this huge negative for years and years that he couldn't talk about. So these are those confirmation sightings. I'll give you another example of a confirmation sighting. Was one that took place in 2003. I think it was 2003. It was up in the Dresden Clemens area. Okay. And there was a tavern up there called the Red Top. And these Hong Kong nationals were fishing. And they saw this creature wading through the water at chest level. And they said it was a gorilla-like creature. And I said to him, I said, wow. I said, you know, it was a little distance away from him. And I said, well, what'd you do? And they go, well, we went fishing. In other words, because of their cultural backgrounds, it wasn't unusual for them in China and Hong Kong to see a primate around, but they just weren't. They just weren't aware that we had them up here. So they had a sighting that was so significant they didn't even realize how important it was.
That's strange. That's wild. Yeah, interesting. Well, when you say how this has transformed the subject, I totally agree with you. I got mixed up in all this right at the turn of the century, about 2003 or so, 2004. So, and I kind of can see when I got in, it was like Bigfoot was still super on the periphery of like pop culture. And now it has become, kind of like a folk story, a folk hero in a way. Bigfoot is, and it helps that like no one owns Bigfoot. So anyone who wants to, if you have a company or whatever, and you need a mascot, there's Bigfoot. You can use Bigfoot. Anyone can be the Bigfoot, whatever. Right. You know, I was up in Canada. I don't know if you saw, I posted a picture. It was like Bigfoot HVAC company or something like it was like Littlefoot, or it had a Bigfoot mascot. It's like anyone can use the Bigfoot. And I think when we've gotten so many answers in our palm of our hands, as you were saying earlier, like with how you would have to translate this stuff. As we get more accessible knowledge, I think the things that still remain unsolved have kind of risen to a higher level in some sense, where now that's why we're seeing these topics treated with a little more respect, because we can answer everything else. Back in the day, 80s, 90s, whatever, if you wanted to know more about Australia, you would have to do a lot of work to go get the books and get them to your, go to the library and get out books, or go to the library and read books or whatever. Now it's like you can become an expert, a quasi, so to speak, in an hour and a half. You can learn all you need to know about that. But these mysteries, we still don't know the answers to.
Right. I can remember, when I started this, I would have to go to the Xerox store and Xerox articles and then mail them. And, and then 2 months later, the Chinese would respond with their own articles and then the translation, all that stuff. So, this is now instant. And social media, I used to follow UFO flaps and Bigfoot flaps in the newspaper reports. And you would have news clipping services, and you would follow a newspaper and cut out the articles and Xerox them and so forth. Now it's instant and it's online, and it's it's an incredible new world. Obviously, there's certain fallbacks with that, but there's a lot of positives with it, and so I encourage that as well. The search engine on newspapers, you can take 1,000 newspapers now and put one search engine name in. And get thousands of articles, where before you would have to take individual editions of the newspaper and go through microfiche.
Exactly.
So you take a search engine for newspapers and you put in the term Bigfoot, you're not going to get anything other than the Native American chief. You're not going to get anything before the 1950s. But if you put in wild man, you will get scores of references and hits to this creature that was called a wild man before it became known as Bigfoot and such. So, you know how to work a search engine, then you can turn up tons of reports. And the thing that changes, that establishes the Bigfoot phenomena from some of the other cryptozoological mysteries is that, like the chupacabra, there seemed to be a starting point for chupacabra reports. You might be able to get one from the 70s, but it seemed about mid-90s on is when you're going to find most of the bulk of chupacabra, the goat sucker reports, and so forth.
That's when it burst on the scene,
Right. But the Bigfoot phenomena goes back, thousands of years in Chinese records and so forth. And over here, it goes into Native American culture. So it's a long history. Of that phenomena. So if I'm a skeptic and I say, well, there's nothing to this, which I don't believe, but if I'm a skeptic and I say that, I make that argument, it's a good point. We don't have the proof positive, but isn't it important to study from a perspective of why are we seeing these creatures? And so for me, this is a win-win, whether you have a skeptic or whether you have a believer. I can deal with both. I don't have any trouble with either group. And I think the data is what's important. So as an investigator, I'm taking down the information as close as possible as to what's being reported. It may seem absurd at times, or it may not seem to fit at times. It doesn't matter. You take it down as close, and it may mean something later. I can remember when Cliff Sparks had his sighting. The creature was red-eyed. Now, it wasn't just red-eyed. It was like, and this was a direct quote from Cliff, it was like short dots coming out like lasers. Mm. And if you can imagine at 11:30 at night, you're out on a golf cart with your dog to take hoses off of different greens, because he ran the golf course there in 1975.
Right.
And he goes out to green 1, and there's this creature standing on the green. And it looks over at him, and Cliff doesn't know what to do. His dog, which normally jumps off the cart and runs around and then jumps back on, subdues over the edge of the cart and is actually got his head down, and because the creature is looking at the dog with this laser vision.
Oh, God.
And Cliff is watching. Now, this is the uniqueness of what Cliff's sighting was. He's not watching the creature look at him. He's looking at the creature as it is focused on his dog.
Oh, God.
So he got to see this very unique view of the vision of what was going on here with the red. And he says, people say eye shine. Cliff was a farmer for years. My dad was a farmer. They both had families at the school, daughters and so forth. So we knew Cliff very well. And so he knew what eye shine was, when the lights hit a raccoon's eyes,
right,
or a cat's eyes, you get that glow. This was something totally different. And he said in interviews, because I've had researchers come to me, that's just eye shine, whatever. And I'm trying to explain to him, Cliff knew what eye shine was. And he said this was completely different. It was like laser-like. So this sort of beckons at that, take down the information as accurately as possible, because this may have a paranormal implication that we just don't understand at this point.
Yeah, well, I remember that from our conversation back in December of 21, that you really surprised me, because you are really open to this idea of sort of this paranormal element to it, because a lot of longtime Bigfoot researchers are really reticent to go there. That's what surprised me. I remember when you went there, I'm like, oh, wow, I figured you were just a skin and bones guy like all the other guys who've been around for a long time. But and I really appreciate that, because I do think that there has to be some kind of paranormal element, even if it's tangential to there being a creature running around.
Well, let's look at it from this perspective. If we look back at the Bear Road incident, which happened 2 years after that August 20th incident, it happened in 1976 on August the 24th. And for about a week period after that, till September 1st, we had a series, a Bigfoot outbreak. But if we start investigating and tearing away the layers, the first articles that appeared in the Post-Star said officers track creature. And it was a very straightforward article about law enforcement people seeing a Bigfoot-type creature responding to a call out in Bear Road in Whitehall, New York. Mm-hmm. Well, the Rutland Herald ran an article as well, and it talked about UFO sightings in conjunction with the Bigfoot outbreak. The Channel 13 News out of Albany came up, and they WAST, and they did a report as well about both the UFO and the creature outbreak. So now we have two different phenomena going on here that initially was reported as just a Bigfoot outbreak. Yeah. We add to that there were what you would call a Thunderbird report as well in that time frame. And so now we've got an entire paranormal outbreak as opposed to just a flap of creature sightings. And when I researched that August of 1976 region, that time period, there was a massive UFO flap going on throughout, not just Whitehall, Salem, Shushan, all over the Northeast. And it went all the way down to Rockland County, New York, where I think it was in Peekskill, a lot of the guards were on alert because, the guards at the nuclear facility there were on alert because of UFO sightings. So this was a huge phenomena that was going on.
Now, this, I got to stop you because this, did this connect at all to the Stan Gordon stuff? Was this the same time period or was this a different year?
Stan Gordon's was, I believe, the early 70s.
Okay.
And this would have been 1976. But back then, I knew who Stan Good was, but we had no connection. This was pre-internet and stuff.
Yeah,
and
they just sound so similar. These two flaps. It's like
absolutely, we reported on them independently of each other.
Yeah,
and to this day, I've never met Stan. I'm just a big fan of his research, and so we were reporting basically the same stuff that he was reporting earlier, without having that connection. So in Whitehall. But I talked to who was the dispatcher at the Whitehall police station. It was the greatest job ever because you just watch TV all night and, you'd take a couple of calls and you'd hang out at the police station. His name was Bob Martell. And Bob said he couldn't ever remember whether it was a week after or a week before, but it was in that time frame of the Abear Road creature outbreak, the paranormal outbreak. So it'd be that time frame within a week of August 24th. He said that they received a call from a woman on the avenues. Now we've got 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th Avenue on the outside of town, and it's all houses. It's they're all connected streets and they're all houses and so forth. Well, they responded because it was only a couple streets away. They got in the police car and went over. And the woman was there and she said it left. She said something landed in her yard. And then it took off just before you got here. Now, they asked what it was. She said it was a round object. And she said it was right over there. And when they went over, there was a matted down area of grass in a circular patch about 20 feet in diameter. And to this day, I can remember Bob Martell said, I reached down to feel, and he said, I could still feel the heat coming off of where something had landed there. Weird. Now, we look back at 1973 and at the La Cabana restaurant on Glen Lake, New York, on December the 12th, something landed. It left 2 concentric circles in the dirt parking lot. It threw the dirt against the door so much so that they needed a shovel to get in. And for the skeptic, I want this explained to me someday in detail. The hot water taps ran cold and the cold water taps ran hot for about three weeks after the incident. So there is a paranormal element there that was going on back at the La Cabana that is consistent with what was reported, 3 years later in Whitehall, where something had landed as well, leaving this round patch. And of course, that became a sort of a calling card for the Close Encounters of the Second Kind cases.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about that case at the restaurant. Very weird. And the water running different temperatures is just astounding. I assume they had someone look at it and try and figure it out, but they couldn't get to the bottom. At that
time, I mean, they were just scratching their head like everybody else. A guy that ran the Adirondack Balloon Festival, Walt Grishcott, took a famous photo of the owner of the restaurant back then, Jack Bergeron, and he's pointing to the 2 circles. And he said, they just didn't know how it happened, what was going on there. But I believe the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization was up investigating as well. And also the dirt, the soil in that circles, on that circle outline was changed in a way. It was almost charred a few centimeters or so down. Yeah. So there was a physical effect that took place. And the hot water tap thing, I've never heard that in the cold water tap thing. I've never heard that mentioned with other reports. So I've always got my ear open for a sister type report to that. But so we have these phenomena that sometimes emerge together. And with the Abear incident, it was like an onion, and we start peeling away the layers. Yeah. And now we've got a full grown paranormal outbreak as opposed to just a creature flap.
Yeah, and that's why Whitehall is what it is in the world of in Bigfoot. It's we're talking the golf course one that's in Whitehall, Abear Road. The other one with Don Gordon, I believe you said was
Dan Gordon.
Dan Gordon. See, I kept giving Stan Gordon, Dan Gordon. I was confused. These are all in Whitehall. This is why Whitehall is the Bigfoot capital. As I said, I'll go as far as to say like on the East Coast, because this is you drive into town and there's a Bigfoot statue at the metallurgy place or whatever it is.
Well, this is the funny thing. There was nowhere for anybody to go when they would visit, so they come to my house and I'd give them a tour or whatever and talk to them for a while. Well, then that became the place to go was on August 24, 76, when the creature walked past a telephone pole on Abear Road.
People went, that was the party?
Yeah, they would go to the pole. They wanted their picture taken next to the telephone pole. And there was a marker on that pole that stood at the 8-foot mark, which was supposed to represent the creature. So everybody would get their picture taken out there. Well, when the Finding Bigfoot crew was in town in 2015, I knew this was going to happen, and it happened. We went out to the telephone pole, and it's the last time you can see the telephone pole standing, as we're shooting what was called the B-roll, and we're pointing to the pole and stuff. And a National Grid truck pulls up, and Matt Moneymaker looks over at the driver and goes, "Hey, you know the history behind this pole?" And he goes, "No." And he told, we gave him a synopsis of the sighting. And he goes, "That's really interesting." He says, "It's coming down tomorrow." So it's the last time you can see the pole standing, and they took it down. And I remember sawing a little chunk off and sending up to Lauren Coleman at the International Cryptozoology Museum. And I've got a little chunk here, and I've got a little piece of the marker that kept it. But so that was the thing. It was the pole. So now that was gone. So now they added Dominguez Hakim. He added a sculpture of the creature that was dedicated, and that's down at the pavilion now. You can get your picture taken with it.
Yes, I love that sculpture. Yes.
Yeah. If you look at it from the side, it looks kind of like the Patterson film. If you look at it from the front, it looks like an old man. So it's really kind of a neat little sculpture. Well, then Eric Miner did a sculpture that's over by the Joe's Pizza, the old spot for that at the Redemption area. Mm-hmm. And then there's this huge statue that was made out by the soapstone store just outside of town.
Yes. Yep.
And that one, everybody still, I go by there, everybody still stops and gets their picture with that.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And if you go to the golf course, there's a one that is right in front of the building, in front of the golf course where it starts. And that's supposed to, for in honor of Cliff Sparks sighting. So now we've got all these different statues that come to town and get your picture taken with and so forth. So now you've got something that you don't have to rely on the telephone pole that's long gone now.
Yeah, it's true. But I don't know if you could even do this, but there should be something there where the telephone pole was. It's too bad you can't just put in your own just giant tall pole. Be like, this was where the Bigfoot, and have a marker on the thing. So that might disrupt traffic too much. So who knows?
Well, what they did, Barbara and Cheryl Patorti and stuff, they contacted the Folklore Society.
Yes.
And so the Folklore Society came into town there, and they have
the Pomeroy Foundation.
That's right. That's right.
And they made the coast to coast. They do great work.
Excellent. And they created a marker that was recently dedicated in Whitehall. And so that is right next to the statue at the pavilion. So if you want to get your picture taken, you can go right to the pavilion. You can get your picture taken with the statue that Dominguez did. And that was the first statue. And you can get your picture next to the honorary folklore sign. So it's recognized, which is basically when I put the legislation in back in 2003, 2004, that's what my goal was. Not only to dedicate this, because the legislation, the law to protect these creatures, make this a protective habitat or whatever, was designed to honor Dr. Cook and to create information for people to understand what this phenomena was. And that's what the main goal was. No one was looking to throw anybody in jail or anything. We were just looking to recognize this phenomena. And I think that's what we've done. So I'm very happy with the way that developed.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, as you go in, folks, there's just Bigfoot statues all over the place. It's kind of a thing. You want to go see all the different statues if you're visiting the town. It's pretty amazing. I love Whitehall. I really do. It's one of my favorite places and one of my favorite destinations every year. I'm going to hit you with some deep cuts that I stumbled upon while digging through your previous books and stuff. So if you need to take a moment, don't worry about it. It's okay. But I have a feeling you might be able to just rattle these off. So I was looking in the Mysterious Northwoods and some of the topics that are in there. This is one of the books that you wrote, I believe, with your brother, right?
Right.
Okay, yeah. And it's and there's no information beside it for the blurb. Like, there's just a list of different weird stuff that happened that's covered in the book. One of them is Virgin Mary appearance.
Yeah.
Does this ring a bell? What is this story?
Well, the Marian apparitions are, that it's a worldwide phenomena. So it's not unusual to find it in this area. I'd have to check for the exact details, but it's nothing all that unusual. In fact, we have on the outside of town was where they had the Doomsday Cult. And that was where they gathered at a place called Ascension Rock. And it was part of the Mormon, one of the factions.
Okay.
And they had gathered there for the end of the world. And it's this huge rock area. And of course, it didn't happen. So they recalibrated and then they gathered a second time. And fortunately, it didn't happen again. So we have this history, these religious cults and Marian apparitions and
Interesting.
things like that. It's just all part of the paranormal world, particularly for this area. But I think if you were to put almost any area under a microscope, you would come up with incidents like that.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. All right. Let me throw another one at you. Gunyak rumors. Does Gunyak ring a bell?
Yeah, that was the creature that was supposed to have been shot and buried and stuff. And it may have been more of a legend than it was an actual physical creature. But we're in an election time, so back then there were hunter groups that would go looking for these creatures, like that creature. And
when was this? Like what year?
We're talking the 1800s.
Okay, so these were rumors of what, like a Bigfoot? Was the Gunyak?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
There was a creature called Old Slippery Skin. That one of the I believe it was Jonas Galicia. I can't remember the exact name, but it was one of the Vermont governors was running for re-election, and his promise was to bring in Old Slippery Skin, which was this bear-like creature. So that was one of the old campaign promises that didn't happen. But back then, when there was a wild man sighting, there might be a group of 100 hunters that gather together with weapons and go out looking for these creatures. So it was a different time than we're dealing with right now. But yeah. So you get a lot of these legendary reports in newspapers. Now, one of the classic Bigfoot reports was on the front page of the New York Times back in the 1800s. It was in Pownell, Vermont. And this 5 foot tall, red haired creature was sighted by a hunter who ended up throwing his weapon and running out of the woods when he saw it. Yeah. So this type of phenomena was not uncommon to be reported over the years. And the commonality is that if you look at Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, New York, Vermont, all you have to look for is wild man, and you will get scores of reports of these types of creatures, whether it be Gunyak or Old Slippery Skin or whatever. There's all sorts of legends.
I got to look into this. It's odd because, Western Mass is kind of like up in that same region of what we're talking about. But for me, it's always hard for me to wrap my head around because I live in the suburbs of Boston. So it's like, there's no Bigfoot in Massachusetts. That's crazy talk. And it's like, actually, there very well could be, because out in the western part of the state, it is very wooded. And as I've marveled before, last time I talked to you on the show, people are going to get sick of me putting over Whitehall. But as you folks, when you drive in, tell me that Bigfoot couldn't live in this ecosystem. Tell me that as you drive into Whitehall. We're talking these giant tree-covered mountains. Massive. Just massive. Of course a Bigfoot could be in there.
Yeah, and you've got terrific researchers like Jonathan Wilk and stuff, and they're researching the Massachusetts sightings, huge documentation of sightings there, Dave McCullough and so forth. So I mean, it's very credible stuff. And you look at the Adirondacks. If you want a good example, they used to run ads for the Adirondacks, and they used to take all these different parks and a proportional perspective, and they could put them inside of the Adirondack region to show just how voluminous it is. And if you want an example of how rugged it is, you can just go back to Dannemora, New York, where those prisoners had escaped, the 2 prisoners a few years back. Yeah. And that became a huge movie and a huge incident. Well, they were on the loose for 2 to 3 weeks, and they had no skills really. And yet they were able to survive in that area, and they were able to elude helicopters, infrared, social media, all these different things. And and they got caught because they got sloppy. I think one of them shot at a camper, and another one ran across an open field. So had they had a little more coof, who knows how long they would have been out there. So all of our modern technology didn't yield us any results there. We were just lucky with how it turned out.
Yeah. Now, this is my last deep cut for you. This one, because I travel up to Rutland, and then I go up to Whitehall. That's my routine. And along the way, I stop in Woodstock, Vermont. And you mentioned a vampire scare in Woodstock, Vermont in 1817. That's a real deep cut. So I apologize. But when I saw Woodstock, Vermont, I'm like, oh shit, I go to Woodstock all the time.
I couldn't, I have to rattle off the exact details of it, but basically they were consistent with vampire scares. And in a lot of those cases, it was tuberculosis that was killing younger people. And so there would be these vampire scares and so forth in all these New England regions. And it was basically the tuberculosis outbreak. And so many young people were killed that they were fearing that, vampires were at work. And of course, you got to remember, this isn't, terribly long ago that we had the witch trials and so forth in Salem. You get these types of hysteria and involved with these types of cases. And tuberculosis was a terrible, terrible medical condition that was killing younger people, which was, you look at the lifespans back then, nothing like today,
Oh God. Yeah, for sure.
There were so many different ways that you would meet your demise. So it was a different time, and I could fully understand how these vampire scares could happen.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Next time I'm in Woodstock, Vermont, I'll see if I can find any additional insights on that. How often have you, we've talked about these classic Whitehall cases. When's the most recent one that you think you've heard that someone's encountered something?
Yeah, it's a perpetual chain of evidence, and we document it with sightings, vocal reports, and track finds. Okay. And sometimes you get a case where you might have all 3. I think the most recent one was from last year that I know of, where a couple of kids had seen a creature before they were getting on the school bus in the morning. And so and that was out on the Abear region, one of those backwoods roads.
Interesting.
So this information keeps coming forward, and what'll happen is you'll get a dry spell where you might not get anything for maybe a year, and then 2 years from then, you'll get a bunch of reports that backfill in that time span. So there may be sightings going on tonight that I might find out about 2 years from now.
Right. Yeah.
That's very common. So it's a perpetual, continuous, and highly consistent chain of reports. And if a skeptic wants to say it's psychological, let's explain it. Let's study it from that point of view too, because I don't think it is, because we've got physical evidence. But let's take a look at why we're seeing these creatures. So I see it as a win-win, and we just keep collecting the data. And I what I preach to younger researchers is, don't get stymied and get closed off into one perspective.
Right.
Collect it all as honestly and as openly and as accurately as possible, because you may get details that may mean something down the road. And don't let this become a religion.
Was there a point in time during your evolution looking at this where your perspective changed? Because I presume, like everyone else, when you first got into this, you figured it was like a flesh and blood creature. Was there a point in time when you were like, okay, I'm pivot, I got to take a step back, or this has changed my perspective on this, and I'm now seriously entertaining the paranormal aspect of it? Was there like a moment or a certain like era or something?
I think I was very fortunate because when the 1973 incident happened, which the La Cabana thing in December, there was a huge UFO flap in October of that year. The Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson case, the Coyne helicopter case, and so forth. So 73 was a huge year for me. And I could remember being interested in Bigfoot and things like that. But I was watching this UFO flap unfold. And it was a phenomenally interesting and exciting time period. Well, and then when the Bear Road incident happened, I was well aware of UFO sightings as well, because the 1974 case and then the Rockland County sightings that coincided with them. So I never really separated it. I just took it down as accurately as possible. And then I was also able to read people like John Keel and people like Brad Steiger, who were tapping into this back in the 60s. And while it seemed kind of out there back then, even for me, I was very open to it. And Brad was a friend over the years who was always incredibly kind with me.
Yes, Brad Steiger was amazing.
What a terrific person. And his wife, Sherry, they both passed on now, but I was in contact with Sherry. I'll tell you a Coast story is I was working, and I would leave work at about 4 a.m. and I was driving home, and I turned on the radio, and immediately I heard Brad Steiger's voice. And it was
you can't miss Brad Steiger's voice. I can hear.
Oh no! He
had that grandfatherly drawl. It was like syrup. It was just perfect.
Could listen to him for hours, and so I knew. I go, geez, I recognize that voice. Of course, Brad had been dead for several years, and I'm hearing him on the radio. And I, oh my God, that's Brad Steiger. And then George Norrie had been replaying one of his old shows dedicated to researchers that have passed away. And so I contacted Sherry, and I said, Sherry, this is amazing. The other night and she had the exact same. It was almost like Brad was tapping us on the shoulder.
Oh, wow.
And I'm sure there were a lot of people that would have happened to. And Sherry had the same thing. She said she got up for no reason, walked over and turned the radio on and heard his voice.
That's fantastic.
So, it was a very, and she was such a sweet person. She actually had a catamount sighting in New York State, a black catamount, one of these passports with the long tails years ago. So, Brad was so nice and such a great person. They both were. And John Keel had written about this type of stuff as well. So I was well introduced into it.
Gotcha,
so I didn't have to have a long learning curve. But I know there's researchers that this is something they'll fight until they finally get a case where, oh my God, it's like Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Yeah.
It was so nice to listen to George Knapp last night with his shows. And George has no trouble talking about the Skinwalker Ranch. It's like going back in time and listening to Brad and John. Oh, yeah. Because there's that upper level conversation going on. Whatever this phenomenon is, it's real, it's tangible, and it's fairly consistent. But it changes, it goes down rabbit holes, and it's mystifying and elusive. And I enjoy it. But at the same time, I'm not, Dr. Hynek went to his grave not knowing the true answers. but he knew about these intricate, unusual aspects to the UFO phenomenon. Other researchers, Stanton Friedman, he never got the full answers. I'm not delusional to think that I'm going to be around for when all these answers come out. But man, the UFO phenomena, the landscape in just the past 5 years has shifted drastically.
Yeah, that's an understatement.
It was like a whirlwind. All George Knapp's work, and the Harry Reid interviews, and getting all these different government organizations to sort of fess up about their research and their interest in other things like Skinwalker Ranch and so forth. So I think what George has done is really moved the compass, the landscape.
Absolutely. Just move the ball down the field at amazing
absolutely
distance.
We couldn't be any luckier to have somebody, a mainstream Peabody Award winner, who takes this stuff seriously.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Now, a couple times you've mentioned the Bigfoot sightings, but now when you reference the paranormal in general, you mentioned consistencies. So what would you say these consistencies are? I'm sure, gun to my head, bro, I could come up with something, but it's clearly this is something that you've thought about. So what are these consistencies?
Yeah. First of all, credible people, very credible law enforcement officials and such. And these are life-changing experiences. When you have somebody, they want to have a sighting or something like that, that's fine. But these are sightings that change somebody's life and their perspective, and it alters who they were and their perspective of what this world is like. And those are groundbreaking, consistent patterns I see over and over again. The fact that this phenomenon maintains its elusivity, and yet it changes and morphs at times to become more elusive. So when you think you got a handle on it, you really don't. And, you think you got a handle on the Bigfoot phenomena, in comes Dogman as opposed to werewolf phenomena or whatever. So it is interesting. It's fascinating. And there are certain consistencies with credible witnesses seeing phenomena that is incredible. And you just take down the information as accurately as possible. Cliff Sparks' Red Eyes report was sort of off the charts years ago. Now it's fairly common. And
really,
in reality, if you go back into the old vernacular of some of these reports, they will say things in that old writing like its eyes were like burning embers. In other words, they're not saying red glowing eyes. That terminology wasn't there, but they're describing that same phenomena. And you will see that characteristic may be connected with other phenomena like demonology or Mothman or other phenomena as well.
Humanoid encounters and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hominid bipedal creature sightings. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I almost feel like you're a bit of an undiscovered gem, Paul, in a way, because you have this encyclopedic knowledge. You've only put out a couple of books. Have you thought about putting out anything next? What's next for you? I want more Bartholomew. I feel like you have this amazing wealth of knowledge in your head, and I need it. I need more of this, like a blog or a book or something where people can get more out of you.
I remember Jacques Vallée and Dr. Hynek used to talk about there was a time to fish and to cut bait. And most of the time I'm collecting the reports. I'm cutting the bait.
Yeah.
And occasionally, we get enough and we put a book out. We'll be doing an update on the mysterious North Woods soon. And then I've got another book in the works that's going to focus on this area as well. So, we've got some things going down the road here and hopefully, just right now looking forward to the next festival.
Absolutely. Hey, we are all looking forward to that. 10 days away, folks, 10 days away. So if as I said to Paul before we started the show, I'm like, if we drop it 3 days before, people already have plans for the weekend. So you're in the clear now. It's just 10 days away. Figure out what you're doing next weekend. You're coming to Whitehall. And if you see me or you see Paul, please reach out and say hello. I'll be wearing the hat. You'll know me from the hat.
That's
and
right.
Paul, you'll know because everyone's crowded around his table talking to him and sharing their stories and listening to his stories. I said this back when I alluded to this at the start of the show, but I mentioned this story on your previous appearance. I got to put you over again, man, because when I first met you at Lake George at the Champ Fest, I'm a little bit of a wallflower at these events, believe it or not, folks, even though I'm running around this ridiculous hat. Really just kind of like, I'm shy. What can I say? And Paul just came right over to me and started talking and was the most gregarious, friendliest guy there. And we just hit it off, and he was just so nice and kind of broke the ice. And I was just like, oh, all right, I'm gonna mingle around a little bit here, and it was all thanks to Paul. He was just so friendly and so welcoming at that event, and he was like, "You got to come up to Whitehall like in a month." And I had heard about it. It was covered by ESPN, the Whitehall Sasquatch Calling Contest, and that's what led me to Whitehall in 2021. Was just Paul's wonderful, welcoming attitude. So I consider you a very good friend since we met just a few years ago. We talk all the time, folks, believe it or not. We exchange news items about what's happening. Paul's a voracious news collector, and as am I, of course, from my work. So we share a lot of interesting news stories. What are you going to be talking about at the festival? Do you know that yet?
I believe it's going to be a history of sightings and some of the more updated sightings as well, and how Whitehall has become a important figure in cryptozoology, in the history of cryptozoology. And I'd like to say, I feel the same about you. And what I've learned is that you are ahead of the curve on reporting.
Oh, thank you.
I can just recently I had seen a radio show that had covered a possible abduction case, UFO abduction case in Lake George. And I had sent it to you. You had already covered it months earlier. So, I mean, yeah, you are definitely ahead of the curve. And so I greatly appreciate that. And I always appreciate talking with you.
Thanks, man. Thanks. I appreciate it as well. So the Whitehall Festival, it's coming up this week in 10 days. Let me start over on that. So the Whitehall Festival is coming up in 10 days. People can find out about that on Facebook, right? Punch in Whitehall, I guess. Whitehall Sasquatch Calling Festival, and that'll have all the information. But you just got to head to Whitehall, New York. That's pretty much all you need to know. It's like an hour from Rutland, Vermont. That's where I'll be staying. And for the people, Paul, I actually have a double shot in 10 days because I'm not just doing the Sasquatch Festival. The folks from Paranormal 5, a group in Maine, they're doing a ghost hunt that night, completely unrelated, just a fantastic timing, at the Wilson Castle, which is just outside Rutland. I don't know if you know about this funky castle that was built like in the turn of the last century.
Yeah, I worked in Rutland for about 20 years.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll be heading from the Sasquatch Festival to the ghost hunt. It's going to be, I'll be having a busy day, and I hope that folks come up and check it out. And as I said, they can find out more from Paul at Paul Bartholomew on Facebook. So just punch that in. Yeah. I don't want to take up too much more of your time because you got to go to work tonight. So I think we'll call it here. I can talk to you endlessly, Paul. I really do. I really do appreciate your deep knowledge of this and your remarkable perspective of open-mindedness as to just how weird this all is and how we really have no idea what it is and we can't really quite pin it down, can't get our arms around it, but it still tantalizes us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've met so many great people over the years. I was able to meet people like Larry Fawcett and Dr. Hynek and, Dr. Cook and, Alexander Petikoff and Seth Breedlove and all these people over the years. It's always been a real positive experience. And people like you, I look forward to it and meeting more people who are really dedicated to just investigating this phenomena. It's always been a positive for me. And I appreciate the work people like you do all the time.
Before I let you go, I'll throw one more Easter egg sort of like topic before we go because we got a little more time. Ogopogo. Have you looked at Ogopogo? Not Ogo. Oh, Jesus, I'm an idiot. The Lake Champlain monster. Have you looked at the Lake Champlain monster at all? It's right in your wheelhouse of strangeness of the area.
Absolutely. My brother's written a book on the topic on and we talked about in the Mysterious North Woods. We talked about the famous Manzi photo and so forth.
Yeah.
By Sandra Manzi. Ironically, you mentioned Ogopogo. I recently spoke at Monster Fest 2 with the Small Town Monsters group.
Yeah.
And, down there was a fellow named Eli Watson. And I've known Eli for a couple of years, and he has just got a documentary out on Ogopogo called Cursed Waters. And
I've heard of this. Yeah, I'm gonna have to get him on the show.
Absolutely, a great guy, and I got to see the premiere of it, which was phenomenal. Very respectful to Native American culture, and it was just a terrific documentary on the topic. I think George Knapp has had him on Coast as well recently.
Yeah, I saw that recently. Yeah. So we have these northern longitude lakes, Ogopogo, Igapogo, Lake Panickamogan, Lake Champlain, Lake Memphremagog, and so forth, that all have this lake monster phenomena going on. And what used to really got Lake Champlain charged up was Joe Zarzynski back in the mid-1970s. And Joe published a book on Champ, but we went to several of his talks. We're good friends with Joe, and he does a lot of the bateau below, which is shipwreck research today. And what changes with the Champ sightings, you can get a hump in the water or displacement or something, and it's very intangible. Yeah. But when you have the head and neck come out of the water and look around, that changes everything, because that doesn't really, there's nothing to really explain that, whether it's some sort of an eel or some sort of, I remember back then, back in the 80s, there was the first International Champ Symposium that had Roy Mackle and other scientists researching there. It was a phenomenal conference, and it was taking the topic seriously, but there's a rich history of Champ sightings, and it's those head and neck sightings that are really inexplicable. And there's enough of them that it seems to be a tangible phenomenon. And of course, we've got the locks that go right through town and connect right to Lake Champlain. So Whitehall seems to be perfectly positioned for this. Situated for it all. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That whole area is just a wonderful place of magic and mystery. Whitehall, and you get Lake Champlain Monster, and I'm looking forward to my return to the area in 10 days. I just wanted to throw that little Lake Champlain Easter egg in for the people who turn it off when they think the show's over. They're like, oh, he's winding it down. I'm gonna get out of here. You missed the Lake Champlain part, so there you go. For people now who stayed to it, they got to hear the extra part. Well, Paul, I cannot thank you enough, man. I'll be talking to you next weekend when I see you at the Whitehall Festival, and I hope we see some of the listeners from tonight's show. Hopefully, like I said, they come up to us and talk to us and say hello if they're there. So, folks, check it out. And Paul, we're obviously going to get you back on the show in the future, man. I love talking to you, and I'm just increasingly impressed by, as I said, your encyclopedic knowledge of this stuff. You really are, you're an invaluable resource, man. You really are. And I'll be turning to you more and more in the future, I'm sure. So thank you for coming back on the show, my friend.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it very much and look forward to seeing you.